Of the next Gemara. Yeah.
Bring rubber gloves and paper.
Yeah. Okay. Same disclaimer as yesterday. It does involve graphic descriptions of diseased material. If that makes any sense. Okay. Tana Rabbanan, we're on top of the Aleph and Aleph.
I guess it could be said the subject of today's discussion is there in the flesh.
So that in order for a Nazir or a Kayan, they're prohibited to become tummy to a deceased body, tummy mace. What exactly does tummy mace mean? So obviously, if you have an entire, a regular corpse, you touch the corpse, right? We spoke about this in the past. In order to become tummy, you need to do one of four things. Maga, masa, hesed, or oil. Maga is to touch. Masa is to support or to carry. Hesed is to push, to move effectively. You could do hesed. One of the ways to do hesed is to, let's say you have a small pile of, let's say, bones, light bones, and you blow it and you move the pile. That's called hesed. Now the bone, obviously, the minimum size of the bone, like you said, is etzem kisa'ira. It's a grain of barley or larger. Okay. So you have hesed and you have oil. What does oil mean? Oil means one of two things. It means going into a room where the body is, or it means becoming an oil over a body. So that means sort of stepping on a grave or stepping over a deceased body would also be part of oil. Even putting your hand over a body, that would also be oil. You are the oil. Okay, and we saw different categories of tummy mace. What's included, and one of the things that's one of the categories included is called a measurement of rotted flesh. So we had tarvid was sort of a disintegrated. I'm sorry, we had nutzel. Nutzel was sort of a disintegrated flesh that turned into a liquid and congealed, or even if it didn't turn into a liquid. And now we have this story of rekev. Rekev is rot, basically. So the flesh literally rotted. Okay, now we'll soon see that there's a very important distinction here that has to be made, which is, as you might expect, most people that are buried, when they rot, their body is mixed together with earth. And sorry if this is too graphic for anyone. So you have what we call offer, which is earth, and flesh that's disintegrated, basically. And we'll see that once you have flesh that's disintegrated, once you have earth that's mixed into the pile, there's no more tarvet. There's no more tumah for the rot. And that's sort of a lot of discussion today. Is okay. Let's see. What's an example of a body that has tumah of rekev, of rotted flesh? Mace shenik ba'aron, you have a body that was buried without tachrich, without a burial shroud. Ba'aron shel shayesh, in a casket of marble. Or on top of a stone surface. Now, what's rekev? This is an example of a body that has the laws of rotted flesh. Why is this? Because in this scenario, we know that whatever substance is in the casket is clearly from the body. It's not even from the burial shrouds. However, Nikbar Biksusai, if he was buried in a shroud, but orange shalates in a casket that was made out of wood, or if the surface was lavanim, how did they change lavanim? Is it chalk?
Bricks, a floor of bricks.
Okay, so it's bricks. But the idea here is that these I don't know, I guess it probably doesn't mean more modern bricks. It means bricks that sort of disintegrate as well. So obviously some of the bricks and some of the wood and the clothes are mixed in with the rot, and therefore there's no concept of rekev. Again, so what do we see from here? Rekev is only when we know it's specifically from the dead body. We'll soon see the Gemara later on is going to consider some extreme scenario that rekev actually is only relevant in a tiny, tiny subset of cases. Okay. We'll get to that in a moment. But as of now, what we're seeing here is that you have to make sure it's just the deceased body. There's nothing else mixed in. If you bury somebody on a, in America, it would be sort of on earth or mud, without a bottom to a casket, like they bury in Israel, then you can be assured there will be no tumas rekev. When the body disintegrates and somebody pulls out a cup of stuff, whether it's going to be a combination of disintegrated flesh plus earth, there is no tumas rekev to it. Okay. Amar Ula, ein rekev alabam and abosrim and agidim and atzamas. So Ula says rekev is only something that comes from a combination of basar, gidin, and atzamas, the flesh, sinews, and bones, meaning that they all have to disintegrate together. If, God forbid, somebody was buried, his flesh and his bones were buried separately, or for whatever reason, some portions of his flesh were buried on their own, there's no rekev. Rekev would only be a combination where some part of the body was buried that had on it flesh, bones, and sinews, and they all disintegrated together. So Rava asked to look at the following question: Habam and Abbas are tahor. 1 second. Seems to be who we quoting here? Is aren't supposed to say quoting is the Mishnah? Rekev Habam and Abbas is the Mishnah. Seems that it was taught that rekev that comes from flesh is tahar. In other words, if it comes just from the flesh, hamina etzem, if it comes from a bone, then tamei, it would be tamei. Even if it's just from the bone, but there is no flesh attached to it. So Gemara says no. Emahachi rekev habam and abasar tahar achiyesh etzem bebasar. The rekev rat would not become tamei unless the bone is inside the flesh. So the Gemara says like a gidin, but there's no sinews, and Ula says you need sinews as well. So the Gemara says ef shalabasar latzamas b'lay gidin. So Ula is saying the explanation of this brayso is if you have a bone. If you have flesh on a bone, there's obviously going to be sinews as well. So as long as you know that at least a limb was buried. Eric is make no bones about it. They're there in the flesh.
So this we're referring to this.
So this brisa basically is the fact that the brisa implies that you need to have a bone in the flesh on the bone, and presumably you'd have sinews as well in any such scenario.
So this is what they're referring to as corpse dust.
That's the rekev.
The correct, yeah,
corpse dust. Okay. Amr Shmuel bar Abba Amr V'Yechanan. Shmuel bar Abba says the name of V'Yechanan. Shnei Mason should cover Zemzeh. If you have two bodies that are buried together, Nasu Galgal and Zelzeh. So again, this is two bodies that are both buried unclothed in a marble casket, right? Because like we said, that's one of the conditions to have the din of rekev. Even in this scenario, since they both break down together, the halacha is that we say Nasu Galgal and Zelzeh. Each one is considered the earth of the other one. So effectively, there's no rekev in this scenario. Even with the disintegrated flesh, there's no rekev because the other body is considered earth. So you have two bodies mixed together, the rot of two bodies mixed together, and each body is sort of considered the earth for the other body. And like we said, once earth is involved, once we know that there's earth mixed in with the rotted flesh, disintegrated flesh, then there's no tum of rekev. Together?
Yeah.
Okay. Tanan hot. The Gemara has a question. Tanan Hassam. We learned kol sheba meis tamei. 1 second. No, I skipped the line here. Hold on. Most of Rav Nosson. Rav Nosson had the following question: rekev habam mi beis meisim tamei. you have the disintegrated flesh that comes from two different bodies, it's tummy. So you see very clearly that they don't become earth to each other. In other words, if a person takes a measurement of rot from one deceased body and from another deceased body and mixes them together, it's tummy. Now there's a kazayas of it. There's a scenario where each body was buried individually, and each body ended up, or both bodies together ended up combining to one kazayas of dust, of rotted flesh. Okay, and because each body was buried together, so each body's dust is still considered tummy. Again, obviously buried without unclothed and in a marble casket or on top of a stone floor. So now that we know each body is sort of a half a kazayas, you put them together, then they both become then it becomes tummy. But if they both were buried together, so then they do not become tummy, because because when they rot, each one's considered they mix together and each one's considered the earth of the other one. 1 second. Okay. It's not awesome. We learned kol shebemace tomei chutz min hashinayim v'asar v'tziparon. The deceased body, everything is tamei except for the teeth, the hair, and the fingernails. Ubeshas chiburon, but when they're still connected, kulam tmein, they're all tamei. Boy Chizkiah. Chizkiah is the following question. Sari ha'omed legalech. If a person dies and he needed to get a haircut, so he's about to get a haircut, and he would have cut his hair. Or tziparon ha'omed legazes. He had long fingernails, he would have cut them. What's the story? Does that become tamei or not? Mi amrina, do we say kol ha'omed legazes kigazes tamei? Anything that is supposed to be cut it's like it's already cut. Or do we look at the fact that right now they're connected? Okay, so what does this mean? If you have a person who passes away with long hair, and you make an oil on top of the hair, so the hair is sort of separate from the body, right? Let's say it's laid out, and the person touches the hair or covers it or moves it. Do they become tamei or not? So the Gemara wants to know, let's say it's hair that's about to be cut. Now, if the hair was already cut, so then we say that the hair does not have tumah. However, if it's still connected, we say it's called yadayim. Yadayim is sort of a handle. It's considered connected to the dead body, so it's part of the dead body, and therefore it has tumah. Let's say it's long enough that it's supposed to be cut. It's at the length where it's appropriate for it to be cut. So the Gemara has a question of whether it's considered as if it's cut and there's no tumah or not. So the Gemara says, so let's answer this question from the previous scenario of Rabbi Bechana. Rabbi Bechana said, we're talking about a situation where you have two individual bodies, each one rotted. 1 second. I'm sorry. No, hold on. I'm confusing her. Skip the line. Here. Hold on. Okay, I skipped the line here. A couple lines further up. First word in the line is al moli. Amar Rabbi Bechana, Amar Yechanan, goes sarah v'kavra imay nasu loy galgalim. If a person cut his hair and it was, or the Chavdish cut their hair and it was buried together with the deceased body, then the hair becomes galgal, meaning it becomes it's considered earth, and therefore there's no tumas rekev anymore. Just like there's no tumas rekev with somebody who's buried with clothing, because the clothing now rots, and the clothing is part of the dust that's left over. So too, the hair is also considered galgal. So the Gemara says that would seem to answer the question. We can move down a few lines. First word in the line is Mia. So let's answer the question of whether the hair that's supposed to be cut is considered cut or not from the scenario of Rabbi Bechana. Time Mishum Digazas. Rabbi Bechana says specifically it's considered dust if you cut the hair. Loy gazaz, if you didn't cut it, loy, then it's not considered dust, and therefore it's considered part of the dead body. And presuming that the other conditions were met, meaning the deceased was buried with unclothed and in a marble casket, presuming that that's the case, then one second, then we would say that it does not become gagalan, meaning that that the it's considered part of the body, and if the other conditions are met, there would be tumas rekev. We wouldn't say it's like you mixed earth in to the dust. Okay, so the Gemara says, Gemara says no, it's not a proof. If it's gazaz, if you cut the hair, so then for sure harei ze gagalan. Then it's for sure a case where we consider the hair to be an earth that was buried together with the mace, with the deceased, and therefore there is no tumas rekev if the hair is cut. If it wasn't cut, loy gazaz mibayle bay. I'm sorry, mibayle. Then it remains an open question. In other words, Rabbi Barchana was not commenting if the hair was not cut, does it become gagalan or not? Because he didn't want to resolve the question of who was it? It was of Chizkiah. Meaning, perhaps it is considered gagalan because it's oimid ligazes, it's supposed to be cut, so it's if it's cut, and therefore it's considered earth, or perhaps not because it's still connected. So Rabbi Barchana didn't want to comment in that situation. But in a situation where it's cut, it's clearly considered gagalan. Okay. Boy, Rabbi Yomi is the following question: Rekev habamana ekev. If you have the dust that comes from the heel, so obviously it's the place in the body with tremendous amount of dead skin, and do we look at that dead skin as if it's not really part of the body because it's dead, even when he's alive, it's dead. So rekev habamana ekev mao. What's the status? Kigamina rekev habamana kula meis. Does the rekev need to come from? Does it need to come from part of the flesh that was alive when he was alive? Avda asim and ekev loy, but that comes from his heel, it sort of was already dead even when he was alive. Or do we say that it makes no difference? And even the flesh that's on the heel is also also has tumas rekev. It also has a tumah of dust. Okay, Toshma. So let's examine this. We saw this earlier. The Tani of Nasim Rabbi Shir Rekev Abba Mishnei Mason Tomei. If the disintegrated flesh comes from two different bodies, it's considered Tomei. And we already explained this brisa by saying we're talking about a scenario where the bodies have disintegrated to the point where there's only a half a kezias of dust from each body. Right? And we're quite certain of this because they were buried in a marble casket with nothing else inside. Okay. Okay. So if that's the case, so these if you now obviously if each body disintegrated and there's only a half a kezias of dust, some of that dust is rekev habamana ekev, and we have exactly one measurement of dust, which means that some of that measurement is dust of the heel. And if dust of the heel does not have rekev, there shouldn't be a scenario of tumas rekev because you have less than the required measurement. Maybe some of this rot is from the heel, and therefore there shouldn't be a measurement. So the Gemara says you're right. The Gemara changes the question. Indeed, that if the entire body either erkev kula meis v'ka'atzi ekev hachanami. Everyone agrees if the entire body disintegrated, then of course we count the ekev, the dust of the heel, to be part of the dust of the rest of the body. What's the scenario? Where let's say it was an unfortunate situation where the person's leg, let's say, or the lower part of his leg was buried separately, or it was buried on its own, or we know where it was buried somehow. And that has now one kezias of dust. And obviously some of that dust is the dust of the heel. So we know exactly that this dust is certainly separate, and some of it's the dust of the heel. Okay, so in that situation, the question is, do we say the dust of the heel is considered, because it was sort of dead even when the person was still alive, do we say that dust is part of rekev, or is it not considered rekev? So the Gemara says, my take, let the question stand. Okay, now we get to a bit more extreme territory. So if you thought this obviously is so far it's a pretty restrictive halacha, because it's only relevant for someone who is buried unclothed in a marble casket.
How often use marble caskets?
You're not allowed to use a marble casket according to halacha. So it's obviously someone who, okay, well, the truth is that Donna will give you the full breakdown. I'm not very familiar, but I believe that a lot of the customs we have in burial begin from the time of Rabbi Gamliel, who buried himself under very strict circumstances with the cheapest available material. And from then on, that's exactly what we do. We bury the rich and powerful, just like the rank and file. Everyone's buried together the same way. Very simple clothing. It doesn't cost a lot of money. Okay. Anyway, so I don't know the specifics. It could be that at some point the marble casket was permitted. I don't know. But I think in general, we typically don't bury marble caskets. That's for sure. Okay. Anyway, so you talking already about a very uncommon situation. Now we'll make it even less common. Boy, Rav Yirmiyah had a question. Let's say you have a woman who unfortunately passed away when she was expecting, right? So that she's carrying a pregnancy when she's buried. Is that considered a separate body? In which case we have two bodies buried together and there's no rekev at all? Or do we say that no, ultimately that she was buried with fetus inside of her, and therefore it's considered one body, and therefore there is rekev? Kivan Amar Mar, since we're familiar with the concept of Ober Yerach Imai, a fetus is considered part of the mother. Helkach Gufahu, it's considered one body, and there is rekev. Obviously, again, unclothed in a marble casket. V'lehav Gagalan. Idilma Kivan the Sefer Lotzes Mifresh Parish Minei. Or since we say the fetus would have ultimately been born, it would have separated itself. So therefore, we consider something else, and it is considered Gagalan, and there would be no Tumas rekev. The imtim tzalaimer, let's say he'll say over a cipher lotus mifresh parish mina, that a deceased body, because it was supposed to, it would have left. Therefore, it's considered a separate entity, and there's no gagalan. Shechva zera b'mei isha mahu. Let's say a woman was buried shortly after she passed away and was buried shortly after she copulated with her husband. So inside of her, there's semen. The Gemara presumes that when a woman's inseminated, it lasts for 3 days before exiting the body. So if she had intercourse within 3 days of being buried, then presumably there's some small minute amount of semen inside of her. Is that considered galgalan or not? Mahu. What's the story? Mi amrina, do we say kivin delay istzer kigufa dami? Since there was no fetus created, she didn't become pregnant, so it's considered as if it's part of her body. Or do you say since it came from elsewhere, it's not part of her body, it's not, then it's considered a separate thing, and then therefore it is galgalan, and there would be no tumas rekev because she was buried with something else.
One more time, Gagalan.
Gagalan means earth.
Okay.
Meaning that rekev is only when we know the dust came exclusively from the deceased. Once there's some, even if it, obviously we're talking here about a woman who was inseminated, it's just a very small amount of something else, that would be enough to be considered gagalan, and there'd be no tuma of rekev. Okay, Boyer of Papa, another question. Pirshamahu. This is it's said in the feminine, but it's true both of a man and a woman. If they needed to go to the bathroom when they were buried, so there is excrement inside of them. Mahu. Since obviously part of the human process is that they eat food and therefore they produce excrement. They excrete whatever's not eaten, so therefore it's considered chiyusahu. It's considered part of their body, and it's one unit with their body, and it's not considered a separate thing. Idilma hanam me'alme also, or do we say no? It's not part of their body. It's food that's now going to be excreted, and therefore it is not. Therefore, it's considered something else, and therefore it's galgalan, and there would be no tumas rekev. Boy, Rav Acha Bred Yervika. Rav Acha Bred Yervika had the following question: Oiroi mahu. One second. Okay, this is okay, to change the spelling here. 1 second. Okay. Is so I right here doesn't mean the skin. Uru, or it means if he had saliva in his mouth, but this is a scenario where he had a lot of saliva. His mouth was full of saliva. Is that considered? Does that become galgalan? Is that a foreign substance, or ultimately it's created by his own body? Rav Huna bar Menach, kicha v'niyah is sort of a saliva that is difficult to take out. So you think of a man whose mouth is full of saliva, that would be reik. A man who's sort of choking on a pickle because doesn't have enough saliva, that little bit that's in his mouth is called kicha v'niyah. Mahu, is that also considered galgalan? So Rishon Barach says to her papa the obvious question here. Let's say you say that all these things are considered galgalan, they're considered foreign substances. Then how is it ever possible to have rekev? It's like somebody was buried without any saliva in his mouth. Zero. Rekev de mitami heichim mashkachasla. How is it ever possible for a person to be buried in a situation where his body would dust of his body would become rekev, become tummy? So the Gemara says the ashkaya made the column. Made the column is the water of a palm tree. Effectively, it's equivalent to a colonoscopy preparation. Sort of cleans out the entire insides. So there's no excrement inside. V'sach yenosha, and there was some sort of preparation that was used to remove every drop of hair, every bit of hair. So there's no hair on it because we said hair is one of the questions. V'shalko b'meitveria. 1 second. And he was washed with the waters of Tveria, which would completely clean his body of any foreign substance, and was buried unclothed in a marble casket. So in this situation, his dust would certainly be rekev. In any other situation, they would not. We don't know if they would be rekev.
So they talk about cooking him in the most areas.
They cook him. Why was that?
They cook him? What?
Oh, according to
cook him in the hot spring.
yeah, according to Taisus shot, that oira means skin, so they'd have to cook him to remove the skin. So he's buried without skin. According to Rashi, the Rivan, whoever it is, you wouldn't necessarily need it. Yeah, it was just according to the Rivan, it was just to remove the saliva that was in his mouth. Amar Abaye says, Naktinan, we learned, Meis shetachnu and lo rekev. If unfortunately a situation happened where a person was ground after they died and then buried, there is no rekev. Ibaylahu, tachnu v'chazer v'herkev. If let's say they ground him and then it was put into a marble casket, mahu. Mediu time el ikabasar v'yidin vatsamis ve'ek. So do we say that the reason why typically if a person is ground, there's no rekev, is because, let's say there's no gidin and atzamas together. There's no sinews and bones being buried in the same place. But if you put the results of the whatever was ground all in the same casket, marble casket, then we do say there's dust. Alternatively, do we say that no, you have to be buried like a normal person, and the body has to be whole to form, and then there would be rekev. Otherwise, there would be no rekev. The Gemara says take it. The Gemara leaves it as a question. Tani Ula taught, Ula bar Chanina, Meis shechaser ein le rekev. If a person was buried missing an organ, there's no rekev, there's no dust. Additionally, v'loy tfusa, there's no tfusa. So this is more complicated. Basically, if a person is checking out a property and he's plowing a field and all of a sudden he finds a dead body. So he doesn't know. The question here is this a cemetery or is this a dead body? So the first thing he needs to do if he wants to remove the dead body, is he has to remove the body plus a tfusa. Tfusa means some amount of the ground that's underneath the body. And all of that has to be buried somewhere else. Okay, if he finds 3 bodies in the same area, we have what's called a shchunas kvaros, a presumptive cemetery. But this happens all the time in Israel. When they do excavations,
Yeah.
they always find dead bodies.
Amazing.
Yeah, or archaeological stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so ein le'rekev lo tfusa. So there's no tfusa. You don't have to take off this bottom layer if you find the body is missing something. V'lo shchunas kvaros, and you don't need to presume there's a cemetery. It's not entirely clear why the cemetery presumption is different if the guy was buried without a hand. Why would that make a difference?
Right.
Places struggles with this question. Okay, Meisfe. The Gemara has a question. Lo imarta b'meis sheyesh le'roiv v'roiva, I'm molitar v'rekev. Okay, 1 second. This Gemara is talking about 1 second. Okay, there was a debate in the Mishnayos whether a kazayas of a live person had an unfortunate accident and he lost a large amount of flesh. And the debate was whether or not this flesh is tummy or not. So one side said to the other, you can't compare this to this deceased. You can't compare the flesh of a live person to the flesh of a dead person, because by dead person, you have the concept of majority of the dead person is tummy. You have the concept of roiva. 1 second. Roiva means a measurement of bones, and the concept of molei tarvid rekev, a unit of dust. Timer b'chai she'ein loy roiv v'loy roivea v'loy molei tarvid rekev. Whereas a live person doesn't have these concepts. If a person's alive and you have the measurement of his bones, there's no tumah. Similarly, if you have a measure of the stuff that rotted, there's also no tumah. Hechidami, what's the scenario? The argav chad aver. Obviously, with a live person, when you're talking about the dust of his flesh, it means that one organ was cut off. And what we're saying here is that by a live person, the dust of one organ is different than a dead person's one organ. Meaning that by a dead person, one organ also has the din of rekev, of dust. So you see that the dust does apply to a body that's missing things. So even though the body isn't complete, it isn't whole, there still is the concept of rekev, of dust. Even one limb, ikarekev. So therefore, we see that even a body that's missing organs still has the concept of dust. So the Gemara says no, there's no proof. Miktani hames. Are we talking about the same situation with regard to a dead person? No. Hakamash malon shumes. The concept is that any dead body has these concepts, but not that it has to be the equivalent unit. The point is you can't compare a tumah of a dead body to tumah of a live person, because by the tumah of a dead body has more categories of conceptual tumah, some of which apply to all dead bodies, some which apply only to some dead bodies. Maybe rekev only applies to some dead bodies, bodies that are very complete, whole. Shumeis yesh le'rekev, shumchai ein le'rekev. But there's never a situation, according to this opinion, that a live person's limbs would have the concept of dust, the tumah of dust. Okay, let's finish this last one. Boy Ravo, or similar point. Rav had the following question: a person lost a limb, and it rotted, it turned into dust. And then he died. Is the dust of that limb tamei? Mahu. Does the law of rekev need to apply that it rotted when he was dead? Or do we say, look, today he's already dead, and therefore, even if it rotted when he was still alive, because he lost a limb, it would still be tamei. So Gemara tries to prove from the same brayso. Toshma. Let's examine this. The categories of tumas meis is more stringent because it has the idea of the majority of the body, a measurement of bones, or a measurement of dust. However, with regard to a live person, there are no such categories of tumah. The reason is because it's still alive. Hames, but let's say he dies, yesh le'rekev. Then there is tumah to a dead body. In other words, you're saying that a live person who loses a limb doesn't have tumah. because dead people have all these categories of tumah, but a live person doesn't. Okay, what happens if the live person dies though? Then he would be the same as a dead person, even though he's lost the same live person that's lost a limb that's now turned to dust. When he dies, he's like a dead person, even though the dust happened when he was still alive. The reason is because he was alive. Hames yesh le'rekev. But if he dies, the idea of dust exists, even to the limbs that dusted turned to dust when he was still alive. Gemara says no, not necessarily. Miktani hames. Does it say that when the live person dies, he has the same laws as dead person? No, we're talking about hakamash the shumes yesh le'rekev. The conceptual framework of rekev exists by a dead person. But you'll never find that concept of dust with regard to a live person.
So even the limb that was severed is already decayed. It can't, there's no record.
There is no rekev to the what was the question again? To the limb
To the limb that gets separate. The limb will get buried, I assume. The person's live.
There's no dust. There's no dust. There's no record
because it's not part of a body.
Right, and obviously your question would only be when it was buried unclothed in a what do you call it? Marble casket. Exactly.
That's funny they use that term, marble casket, unclothed. These stipulations.
Yeah, because we know
We
that
don't want to be mixed with.
it can be right. Exactly.
Right.
Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean it never happens. Oh, it's possible.
Yeah, for a scenario where,
Could very well be.
you want basically a clean dead body.
Right. Okay, everyone.